From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast. Today, we are thrilled to host Travis Potter, who is the visionary founder of Green Lightning and a pioneer in sustainable farming practices. With a background that spans from founding Tractor Beverage Company to developing groundbreaking crop nutrition solutions and a laundry list of different things that he's done in his agricultural life, Travis's journey is nothing short of inspiring. In this episode, we will talk about the science, challenges, and successes that Green Lightning has already seen and how they developed it and some of the tools behind it. It's one of the most innovative approaches to soil health and crop performance that we've seen. So join us on today's episode. Learn about one of the most revolutionary products in the industry right now, and I'd say probably one of the fastest growing products in the industry right now too. And you can find out more about Green Lightning at greenlightning.ag. And if you ever want to reach out to us, they're constantly in our magazine. If you ever need help with coming in contact with them, just reach out to support@acresusa.com. Thank you all very much and enjoy the episode with Travis Potter. All right, I'm joined with Travis Potter. Travis, thank you for joining the Acres USA podcast. Super excited to chat with you a little bit more about your new product. But what are you guys up to right now?
It's
I'm
a
sure
privilege.
just traveling and busy.
Yeah, traveling, a lot of family stuff, and we're kind of heading back home now. So I'm in a rig while my wife's finished up some shopping. You know how that goes. Yeah.
Well, your wife is a pretty incredible woman. You guys have quite the family that you've created. Congrats on that.
Yeah, we're crazy blessed. We have 11 kids, and we have 10th and 11th grandbaby on the way. And that's with our first two kids. So we're pretty busy. It's good though. We're having a lot of fun.
Yeah. How the heck do you manage all that family time with the business?
I don't know. It just works out. A lot of the family works in the business, so it's kind of like 24/7, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So let's go a little bit about your background in agriculture. How did we get to this point where you created Green Lightning and a pretty revolutionary type product? But let's go a little bit. Give me some of your background.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So, I kind of like beginning background. I grew up on a ranch in the Southern Sierras. So when I say California, everybody thinks of palm trees and cities, but we were 45 minutes from our closest gas station in the middle of nowhere. I took an hour and a half on the bus to get to school, kind of thing. So we lived in the middle of the boonies, high desert, not a lot of water, and so in general, raising cattle and sheep and everything else, it was a good lifestyle. Not real profitable, and it wasn't going to be like a legacy thing. It was like we lease it, and then somebody else makes money off of our lease, and we hope there's some money left over. If we work hard enough, then we can, own more, more animals, not more land there. But it was kind of a race to the bottom on what ag does. I went to a really good ag school, and as far as my high school that I went to, learned most of the kind of basics there, which it's pretty amazing to kind of be in that situation. And then got to a point where it was like time to go to the next level. And at that same time, I remember raising sheep. And one night I spent all night keeping this lamb alive. Like that's all I did. And we fed it probably $400 of the formula. And I took it to the sale like a month later, 2 months later, and I got like $8 for it. And I'm like, this is not a good business model. And then I went to the store after that, and they were getting $12 a pound for lamb. And I thought, man, I am on the wrong side of agriculture. So I started looking at the pie, and I started talking to smart people and farmers, and just kind of like an inquisitive young guy. And they're like, you need to go ride for the brand. Go work for as many places you possibly can, and figure out how they did it, what worked and what didn't, and go from there. So I figured being a cowboy probably wouldn't pay a lot, but shearing sheep might send me in a new place every day. So I started shearing sheep all over the country, and something like 50,000 sheep. I don't even know how many. But during that time, I learned a lot about agriculture. a lot about farming and different environments from, from the Central Valley of California to the mountains of the Mountain West and Texas and Oklahoma and even Florida, Georgia, and then Minnesota. So we bounced around a bunch. During that time, I learned a lot, and I learned a lot of different ways of doing things and who actually made money at it and who didn't, or at least what it seemed like it. And then I went to a meat college in Minnesota. It used to be one of the best, and we learned everything meat wise. And so that was the, kind of selling the end product. And then from there, during that time, it was kind of an interesting time. Like this will give you a little bit of how we got to where we're at. It was as I sheared sheep, I found that there was kind of a common denominator of where the sheep were really well fed and the ground was really pretty amazing. The animals didn't live very long, maybe 6 years for these sheep, and they had bumps on them. And I didn't quite understand what the deal was. But if I was like in the middle of Wyoming or somewhere in the boonies, I'd have these like 105-year-old ranchers with these 20-year-old sheep that are still like thriving. And I thought, the people and the animals that were in those other places weren't doing so well. What is it? And my ancestors all came from, from Iowa and from Kansas, and they're all farmers that worked their way west. But I started looking at a few things, and at me college, we lost what would have been our third kid, so we would have had 12 kids by now. But um, during that time, it was we were kind of going back and forth because we had a lot of health problems in our families. Like everybody that I knew, my mother-in-law had breast cancer, my mom had diabetes, and I started looking at all of our families, and I'm like there's got to be a correlation between all the chemicals that we've got all over this country, and health, and then and the soil, and like what is it exactly? Like, and so that kind of got us on a deeper dive and understanding. I was at meat college one day, and they said, you go get all the spices and all the ingredients that go in all of our meats for the week. And I went in this room, and it was like amazing. Like the smells were amazing. Like it blew me away. And then I started reading the ingredients, and I didn't know what they were. There were chemicals that I've never even seen those chemicals before. And I grew up, my mom worked for Dryers Ice Cream. We used to do, we worked helping do drop off ice cream into locations and merchandising. And I used to look at the labels, all kinds of stuff. We knew a lot about processed food too, but I wanted to know like what the real stuff was. If I was going to try to figure out a way to make money in this thing, I wanted to figure out what the ingredients were that were going in there other than what we grew. And and I asked my meat professors at the time, and they said, um, "Don't ask too many questions. You're not going to get a job." And I'm like, "No, no, no. I'm not here for that. I want to. I'm trying to figure out how to what's in it." Uh, and so they said, well, it's Cure 81. They tried it 81 times and it works. Once it works, you just go with it. That's just the way we do things. And I started thinking about kind of like daddy and granddaddy's way of farming. Like that's the same way. Like they just do it. They don't ask why. That's the recipe. You follow the recipe. If it's off recipe, then nothing's going to grow. And then there were a lot of different chemicals and things that were going in there. And I said, well, what's in this bratwurst? And they're like, we don't know. And they're like, we're too busy to talk about it. He's got he's got cancer. He's got to go deal with it. He's gonna be gone for a little bit. And the one professor, he's like, there's a thing this is in the mid '90s. So there's a thing in the library called a computer. If you go on this www thing, it'll ask you. You could ask whatever questions you want. You will find out all your answers. And I'm like, all right. So I went in there. I started putting in these chemicals and what they were, and then I also started putting in trying to understand like the health stuff. And I'm like, oh, these might cause some of those problems. And it kind of like light bulb. That's what we got to do. We got to just raise clean food. It's pretty simple. And I'm like, I've met plenty of people that did it. So we went back to the West Coast, um, did the first organic beef deal. We sold farmers markets, and we're talking 2000. So this is a long time ago. So we were kind of the pioneers and telling people that they had no idea what organic meant. And it was really the beginning of what organic in livestock was, anyways. And so we're standing on the corner of San Francisco saying, make burgers, not war. Just kind of like funny things to get people fired up. But we were also like, you couldn't put certain things in organic food that you could in conventional. So, and we had to get rid of the whole animal. It wasn't just like selling filet mignon and ribeyes. So we were making sausages and sticks and all kinds of stuff, and marinated stuff, and it was a lot of fun. But in that, we ended up doing all kinds of different meat stuff, and we had retail shops and sold to people. It was very satisfying to sell to people that actually wanted it. It was also, you got a little cocky when you're charging $32 a pound for filet mignon because you're going to run out in 10 seconds anyways. You can charge whatever you want. Like there's only 8 pounds on the beef anyways. Doesn't even matter. Like it's going to be gone. Like if people try to dicker with you, it doesn't matter. It's like it's gone. Like we got to a place where if they didn't come before 8 o'clock in the morning, they were not going to get filet mignon. Like so that was kind of like the fun, farmers market version of it. And then kind of like the next level of it, as family members got sicker, I met some really amazing nutritionists, and they said, go into your mom's fridge and take out all these things that have any of these ingredients in it, because these are probably some of the problems why they're having what they're having. And so we went to my mother-in-law at the time. She had bad cancer, and so she had like corn silk and cottage cheese and kombucha and like some weird stuff. And then I went to my mom's, and it was all processed junk. Like I got a 55-gallon drum, and we took everything out of there that didn't make any sense, and we threw it in there. The only thing that was left was milk, and it was conventional. I'm like, let's just change it out. So at this point, I'm kind of like an organic advocate, but I'm just trying to take out chemicals. I want people to live longer, and at the same time, make a little bit of money at it. And I think all of us are. It's got to be both, right? It can't be just it just makes you feel good, but it does. You got to make money to make the whole cycle work. So so as we got into that, I looked in that big old trash can, and I started seeing all that stuff, and I'm like, you know what? Let's just recreate all that. Why can't we make a coffee creamer or a pudding, or a dip or a yogurt or like? So I kind of went nuts. I'd already made sausage and everything else, and so now I'm making sausages, and then we end up doing like lunch packs where we have meats and cheeses and all kinds of stuff. It was just like all of a sudden they got more exciting, and then we were busy, and this was like '06, '07. And at that time, we're filling a need because we have organic guys that can't sell the rest as much as they have, and marketers that are not willing to create new products. So we were kind of an interesting added value thing. And then '08 hit. Holy mackerel. That was a mess. We went from people paying $12 a pound for cheese to can't afford $2 a pound for cheese. So they went from being very picky and wanting organic to I just need calories. And so it was really a kind of a huge change in the way we were thinking. But at the same time, like we knew that you can still do it. Like we started seeing the economics. Like you can do it right and make it affordable. It doesn't have you don't have to charge $32 a pound. At the end of the day, like we're selling 90% pot roast and ground beef anyways. So let's just feed everybody. And so we kind of veered a little bit from the meat side and focused on the dairy. Also got into soft serve ice cream and frozen yogurt because that kind of went nuts for a little bit, and then it became kind of interesting. We went from like a pallet of 50 different products, dropping it off to Whole Foods throughout the West Coast and Rockies to now we're selling a truckload of 3 flavors of frozen yogurt and soft serve. Like all of a sudden it changed, and people can afford that, and there was margin in it. So it was always part of the fun of it. But during that time, there was always the same like our costs were always higher because it's organic, and at the same time there are always these problems. And I'm still shearing, like I sheared along with all this the whole time just because it's in my blood. Once you're doing it, you always like you crave more knowledge, and sometimes you get more knowledge while you're bent over sweating like crazy than you're uh, doing your normal business stuff. And so as we went through that, our biggest issues were with bugs and fungus and crops being good enough. It was always nitrogen was a problem. And so during that time, we ended up as '08 kind of dwindled in that time frame, into 2010, 11, we started getting scrappy. My son had his own hogs and had his own barbecue shop he opened up, and 16 years old. So that was kind of a ambitious thing for a young guy to get going. And obviously the family jumped in, and we had frozen yogurt shops and things like that. And so it was kind of like we were learning. We were selling retail. We were doing like 50 people's jobs. Sometimes people are like, "Oh yeah, you're making all that money in retail." I'm like, "Yeah, but we also take up the other 50 jobs. Like commodity is you're missing the 49 jobs, but man, it's a lot easier to sell if it's a lot more." So that's where we got into the soft serve and
Well,
frozen yogurt.
that was gonna be my question. How did you manage all these different things with?
It's
I
a
mean, you're
it's an easy way to lose your mind.
describing a lot of different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, you just had you have all these things, but as my kids got older and we had a little more, I don't know, like more motivation. I mean, if no work, you no eat. Like it's you got to hustle, and if it's at some point, you just keep on doing what you're doing until something makes sense. And so during that time, so my insurance
I
guy
got
calls
you.
up and he said, "Hey, I want to start this other thing with you, this other food business." And I'm like, "What is it?" And he's like, it's a paleo thing. I'm like, what the heck's paleo? And he's like, well, it's like if you can kill it, or you can pick it off a tree, or you can pick a berry in the forest, that kind of stuff. And I'm like, you want like a fruit and vegetable and meat company? And he's like, no, I want to make tortillas. And I'm like, out of meat and vegetables? He's like, no, out of almonds. I'm like, oh, I get it. Like you live in Camarillo, California, uh, where you can afford to pay $1 a tortilla, because almonds are $8 a pound and wheat is 10 cents a pound. Like you understand that, right? And he's like, yeah, but I can't do wheat anymore, and I miss the crunch, and like just having something to hold my food in. And I'm like, just use a fork. And anyways, it became a kind of a funny thing. So we started creating this paleo company, and then we went to go talk to his investor buddies about it, because neither one of us had any money at the time. It was just like hand to mouth at best. And we were farming too. We're farming, doing all these things, and trying to make it work. And last thing I really needed to do was add one more thing to my plate. Yeah, so he's basically like a crazy hippie guy. Although at the time he was Mr. Beamer, clean cut guy, but now he looks more like Jesus. I mean, he's got long hair and big old beard, and he's got 9 kids. So we're kind of like in the same deal. He's just the hippier version of what we were doing. So, but at that time he had an insurance company. He's like, you know what, I'm selling my insurance company. Like, we got to partner up on this other business, so he's like, there's this opportunity for this organic burger chain to be part of it. And as I was analyzing it, and we figured out, they said, help create it. So we started creating all kinds of like different concepts and things. And but the moral of the story is you can't have the normal drinks people are used to and have organic food. It's a bad brand idea. So and at the time there was no organic beverage that made sense. And I thought, it's really difficult, if we ever wanted to, like, if we really want to make a big impact, we'd make drinks or food in a massive scale. And this came back to like the whole marketing thing. Like, it's cool to sell filet mignon to somebody, and they're super fired up to get it, where they'll get there 8 o'clock in the morning and do everything they can to go beat somebody up to get it from you. It's fun to sell yogurt and cheese. It's kind of like a normal, maybe weekly thing, or maybe even daily. But drinks, people drink all day long. And I thought, that would be a good way to get clean food into more people. And at the time, with my big old family, like, we drive cross country, and like the options are tea or water. Like, you're not going to drink any of that stuff. And so that was the, like, all right, well, it might be interesting to do something in beverage, because that, I kind of get it. But doing it in food service is a total different ballgame. We're not buying the shelf. We're not, going through the normal, like, trying to drop off a case of stuff in every store on the planet, like all the things that are difficult. And so I thought, just like the frozen yogurt and some of our other things, like, you could sell a lot to a couple different people. So pretty cool. And so that's kind of where it got interesting, because I started working on the beverages. Now, I hadn't drank any soda since 1998. So when we lost our third one, we were in meat college, and we decided we are going to start eating better. That was our, like, but I know that, I mean, I remember my stepdad saying when I was a kid, he said, he worked for Coke, and he said, the only way this restaurant's in business is because of us. They're making like 20 to 30 times as much money off our drinks than they are off anything else, and everything else is expensive. And it always stuck with me. And so that was my, like, if you're gonna be in the restaurant business, and we knew it because we had restaurants. Like, meat's expensive, protein's expensive. Like, the last thing people want to pay for is that, but they have to. But beverages, there's margin in that. And so we started a beverage company. We didn't end up doing the organic burger chain with those guys, because they ended up going a different direction. But that's a nice way of saying it. But in general, it was pretty cool. And I went into a Chipotle with my wife, and we appreciated the clean food they did. And I told her, I'm like, we are gonna have our drinks in Chipotle someday. Because if I walk in and I see that machine over there, and and all their food says clean, but the machine says dirty, what does that mean from a branding perspective? Like, they've got to have better options. And she's like, I'm like, that's what we got to do. Let's start the biggest organic beverage company in the world and sell it to restaurants. And we started. So that was kind of the beginning of it. And I told my hippie buddy that he's like, hey, are we going to do anything with this? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, what about the paleo thing? I'm like, I got a better idea. If we really want to make an impact on the world, let's make better drinks, like really good quality stuff, like from scratch, from farmers that we know, from all around the world. And that became Tractor. So first it was Red Tractor Soda Pop, and then we had some we argued over soda and pop. What do you call a soda where you're at? You call it pop, or you call it soda in Wisconsin?
I think it's actually a mix between both. I call it soda, I think. I don't know. It's people. It's like on the east side of the state they call it one thing, and this side of the state they call it a different thing. It's a mixed state, I guess.
So depending on what part of the world you're in, typically it's soda, it's pop, or it's just Coke. Yeah, if it's in the South, doesn't matter if it's Coke or Pepsi or Dr. Pepper, whatever. But anyways, we got done. So we ended up calling it Red Tractor Soda, and then we had to cut. We took the pop off, and we found out there was a branding issue with Red Tractor. So we're like, all right. So then we called it Tractor Soda. And so I changed my website domain like 50 times. I don't know. But it was all part of the fun of it. And then and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to sell to every one of these fast casual restaurants because they all need us. Like the world's changing. People are not, they're not buying as much of the other stuff. So it worked. And after like knocking on Chipotle's door, for like 5 years, finally they listened and they were like, you're right. We need an option. And so we went into Chipotle and they said, okay, you guys have, you guys have an idea of, we need like $40 million worth of drinks. Like, you know how much organic stuff that is? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, is there that much of it? I'm like, yeah, of course. And then I'm like, wait a minute, is there? And I'm like, there is of some ingredients, but I called my buddies in Florida and I said, hey, can you get it? How much organic oranges can you produce? And they're like, we had to go back to spraying, man. And I'm like, why? They're like, because we got this green disease. We're actually plowing over a bunch of our fields. And I'm like, ugh. I'm like, what's that mean? They're like, it means there's no more oranges in like 10 years all around the world if it keeps on going the way it's going. And I'm like, so what you're saying is don't make stuff with oranges in it. And he's like, yeah, or if you could help fix it. And I'm like, help fix it. And at that time, I was kind of like my head was in a different space. I'd gone from let's make some drinks to like, I got 11 kids and I'm going to have like, 1,000 offspring in the next 200 years. I probably should figure out a way to feed more people. Right. And I got people saying, hey, there's not enough food for the world. I'm like, have you ever driven from Idaho to Florida? Like how much land is between there that is not being used properly? But anyways, I put in geothermal greenhouses. I was doing fodder for livestock. So we're growing green grass year round, making algae, like all kinds of weird stuff. Like anything that was interesting that I could try. But I was like, I'm going to figure out a way to feed 20 billion people. Like we're going to figure it out. And so at the same time, I'm making drinks for, like coffee chains and stuff. And so we were making nitro coffees and nitro sodas and I was having fun. I had like 1,300 different products I'd played with. So you just kind of get on a rat race of all this crazy stuff you're doing. And at the same time, I'm like, you know what? If I can't just do oranges, uh, like there's got to be a way to fix stuff like that. And we had citrus in California at the sheep operation that we had. I'm like, I know citrus. I know what it smells like. I know it smells like rotten, and I know what it takes to get it to market. And I thought, there's got to be a way to fix all that stuff. So I'm like, I'm gonna start a biological ag company. So I did it with my partners, and I'm like, you know what? Let's figure out a way to help our farmers, because if we can help our farmers, we're going to have a lot more ingredients, and then we can help them get bigger. But if we don't, then the organic thing's just kaput because we can't ever get bigger than what it is. And so that was the beginning of the kind of understanding. So we created these biologicals, and they worked, but they were like $500 an acre. And if you're only getting $500 an acre with $500 of ingredients, and you have a bad week, you're not going to buy that stuff anymore. And so, but at the same time, I'm making these nitro sodas from the air, and I'm like, we used to nitro flush our meats, and we nitro flushed our dairy products, like, and that's organic because it's just air. Why can't I just put that back in the ground? Like we breathe 78% nitrogen, and then we have an oxygen, but there's got to be a way to get out of just like a legume does. Like we got to figure it out. And so at the time I asked our PhD agronomist, hey, like, can I just use this nitrogen from the air and put it on a plant? It'll work. And they're like, no, no, you got to unlock it. So that's what that legume is doing. They're unlocking it. And I'm like, I'm like, we're playing with nitrogen ice cream, all these things. Anyways, so, but they're like, but I met a guy. His name is Joe. And that's why we're talking today. So we call him Nitro Joe, superhero. Like the guy's like, he's changed the world. He's not a farmer. He was like in a nuclear submarine for 5 years. Nobody's normal if they've been under the water for 5 years. he's he did hydrogen engines, so he figured out how to blow up water. Pretty awesome. He did like I don't know all kinds of crazy stuff. But he grew up in the marine industry. He went through all these different things. He did some technologies where they can get rid of all of the fumes come out of back of diesels. Like the guy is genius, but he didn't know how to speak farmer, and he had no idea of this thing that he experimented with, the impact of what it was. And so he told me, he said he was asking me as an investor, like, I am not an investor. I ask people for money. I am not the guy that's going to invest in you. And he's like, but do you know people? I'm like, yeah, I know lots of people that would be all over it. If your technology of taking nitrogen from the air and you could and mix it with water somehow and put it on a crop works, I don't know anybody wouldn't buy it. And he said, I'm going to partner up. And I'm like, I don't know. I said, send me some of that stuff. It's too good to be true. And just like every farmer tells us, like it's too good to be true. And I'm like, how does it work? I'm like, and at the time I was making carbonated sodas and nitrogen stuff and all that. And he's like, it's like lightning. You take into what we breathe, and lightning comes and strikes it, and then you got two ends, and then the oxygen that's in the air connects to it, and it drops in the water. And I'm like, that's it? All it is lightning? He's like, yeah, we just shocked the water basically in a certain way with certain harmonics. And like, he's like, it's not just that easy, but yeah. And I'm like, is it patented? He's like, yeah. And he's like, and I'm going to get a lot more patents. And I'm like, okay, how much do I put on per acre? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, how do you know it works? He's like, I gave it to the USDA and a bunch of citrus guys. They put it on and we mixed it with your stuff and made your stuff work better than ours. That are, with my, he said, my stuff made your stuff work better. And he was right. And we got rid of our stuff and he just used his and we had citrus screening gone. And I'm like, this is getting very interesting. And I'm like, do you have any idea how this would affect 190 million acres of ground in the Midwest? And he's like, oh no, we can never get that big. We can only do a little bit. And I'm like, no, if you can figure this out, we can do it. I'm like, can't you just make it bigger? Like giant fire hose, more air, more power. And he's like, no, it doesn't work like that. So after a few years of working on it and going back to it, I took his stuff and I put it in my greenhouse and I put it on these tomatoes I just bought from Ace Hardware that was like free to good home. They were like $1 a piece or something. And they were ugly and it was August and they should have just thrown them away. But I got them. I put in my greenhouse like 100 of these things. And I put 50 on one side, 50 on the other. And I sprayed his stuff on it and I left it alone, came back after like the kids' livestock show. And his grew like 6 or 8 inches, maybe 12 inches. And then the other stuff died. Like aphids ate it. They were toast. They were ugly and nasty. Same dirt. And I'm like, this guy's onto something. And then I kept on spraying on it. By October, we had 6 foot tall tomatoes with 9 bricks tomatoes hanging off of it. And it was like anywhere from 14 to 22 bricks leaves. And I'm like, oh, this stuff works. And I'm like, then I called him up. I'm like, well, how does it work? And he's like, well, I just plug in the wall, electricity and water. And I'm like, oh, is that your model? He's like, well, I was just going to make these models and sell it to greenhouses or something. I think that'd be good. I'm like, well, how much can you make in a day? He's like, a gallon a day. I'm like, a gallon. I'm like, how, and I mean, how much am I supposed to put on? Is like, is that for a plant or for an acre? And he's like, I don't know. That's your job. And I'm like, okay. So that was the beginning of it. So, and I've said this a few times, so other podcasts will be the same redundancy, but the reality was it was so like this stuff just works. I got to figure it out. So at that point, I'm like, I'm thinking like, how do we make $1 million of these machines a day or an hour? I'm like, by the time that and then I'm like, well, what's the economics of it? Like, does it make sense financially? Can I hook up to a solar panel? Can I run a bicycle next to it, make it work? I don't know. What are the ways to make this thing work where it was good for the ground, good for the farmer, and good for everybody who was going to eat down the chain? And so that was the beginning of it. So now where we're at today is that was 4 years ago or so. Now went all in. We've been focused on it. I sold my side of the other businesses. I'm like, we're gonna make this thing grow. We're gonna blow this sucker up because what we found is about it's the equivalent of 2 pounds N. It does not weigh the same, but it works the same as that. Now it's 3 pounds of equivalent N per gallon. We can spray it on a field, and 60 gallons does the same as 200 pounds of N on a field. And I don't care if it's organic or conventional or whatever. At 2 cents a gallon, cost of electricity, everybody on the planet needs this thing. So since then, we had a little facility in Florida, moved it up to Kentucky. I moved from our Idaho facility to here with the whole family, everybody, like 30 of us moved from there to here. And we're like, we are going to feed the world from right here and it's going to change things. So what we found was we were getting higher yields than conventional with our stuff on corn and potatoes. And we had bigger potatoes organically with just water and electricity than we did conventional, which were like 4 times bigger than with nothing on them. And if you ever been around organic potatoes, they're small, always small. These things were huge. Like they were like almost too big. And I'm like, we like finally we got to this crazy level of it's working. So that was last year. This year has been a little different. Right now, I was just doing the numbers with Cheyenne, my oldest daughter. We have 396 machines in 38 states and 32 countries right now since March. And we're like, holy mackerel. It's working. Now we had plenty of issues. We had water quality issues, we had electricity issues, we had to figure out stuff. We realized that having black painted metal works, but it scratches, just like little things like that. Stainless works better than aluminum. Like we had to go through all those kind of things. But at the end of the day, we're cranking and it's pretty amazing. And this technology, when somebody owns a machine, the cost of nitrogen just basically went to nothing. But the real thing, it's not just the nitrogen cost. That's what we're kind of getting at is it's doing something way more. And that's kind of like the next level stuff. Like we're taking bacteria and putting it on it. We're getting 200% bacteria growth next day, 600% in 3 days. And our fungi to bacteria ratio is 2 fungi to 1 bacteria. We're like, I'd never seen that. Like all of a sudden, like the soil is like coming to life. And we had where guys sprayed our stuff, and ours lasted for like an extra 9 to 13 days longer, and we didn't quite understand that. Like, what caused that? Well, it kept the moisture in the ground longer. Like, that's crazy. And the bacteria, like, it made it more aerobic. So now the soil, like the bacteria is going nuts, and even where our stuff wasn't on conventional fields, it grew halfway into the other parts where it was still greener longer, and they were getting more nutrients. And then we talked to Tom Dykstra, and he said, have you checked the bricks on your corn and on your soy and all that stuff? And I'm like, yeah, I think about that typically more like fruit and vegetables, but he's like, no, you try it on everything. He's like, a lot of it, especially if it's GMO, is probably not going to go up much, but if your stuff can move it up just a couple, if you can get above 10, no more fungicides needed. Not organic or conventional fungicides. And I'm like, oh. He's like, yeah, it's so healthy, it doesn't need it. If you get above 12, he's like 12 to 14 really, but if you get above 12, you don't need any pesticides. Your bugs will not eat those plants. They are so healthy, it doesn't matter anymore. And if the plants are healthy and you spray that stuff on there, now your roots are getting deeper and you get more nutrition in the plant. And he's like, everything comes to life. And I'm like, what is this crazy stuff? Like, what is it we're doing? Like, we're accessing, it's in the air. It's not just nitrogen and oxygen, but it's the same thing that makes the sun and the stars and the northern lights and lightning. Like it is, and it happens to be right in front of us. Like that, this is a beautiful design, and
Do
now
you
we have
do
access
do
to
you
it.
do you describe it that it's mimicking what lightning does? Like when you have an aggressive lightning storm, the
Yeah.
grass is greener, things
Now
are more
so that
lively.
that term is called green lightning. So that's why we called it green lightning. Not only was it a cool name, but it's also like that's the effect that we're having. And what we're doing is we're actually making lightning inside this little box in the stainless steel apparatus and running rain through it. We're basically taking it and making regular well water, cleaning it up, making it rainwater, and spraying it through lightning. I mean that's like the easiest way to say it, which sounds very simple. There's a lot more that goes into it, but that's what happens. And then it goes in the tote, and if the pH drops at a certain level, like it should, and usually it does, and it does that with lightning too, then it's stable and you can mix with it about everything. Like it doesn't burn. The only thing we saw it burn with is guys did put it with chemicals or they put it with 28 and they sprayed it on. Like, don't put salt with our stuff and spray it on a crop, you're gonna have problems. So these are all things so whether it's organic or regenerative or conventional or like don't even call it anything, our stuff is going to be able to feed 25 billion people. Like
Yeah.
no doubt in my mind.
What is Nitro Joe? I mean, so this original technology was created for a completely different purpose. What did he or how did he come up with the fact of putting this on plants?
Well, but for him, it was totally accidental. He
Yeah.
said, I was using this technology to mitigate the chemicals coming out of a back of a muffler. He's like, it was also a byproduct of hydrogen. So when you're breaking hydrogen apart, what do you do with the nitrogen? And so he tested the nitrogen and he's just a Florida, Marine guy. And he's like, oh, this is the same stuff they're using for crops. And this was like 14, 15 years ago. He had this aha moment. And he's like, I'm trying to sell the wrong thing. Like, he's like, I've been doing all this stuff to try to add some kind of apparatus to every vehicle on the planet to make it a better deal. But at the end of the day, this right here, if you can make your own fertilizer on your own farm, how much less inputs, like just shipping stuff all around the world, do you have now? And how much you just gave the keys to the farmer, where he on their own farm now they can produce something, they don't have to buy it. There's no variables. And he's like, oh. But then he had to test it, and so that was part of it. Like, so when we met and we partnered up, it took a couple of years of going back and forth and trying all kinds of stuff, trying to try it on strawberries and pasture, and trying it on our lawns and figuring out when it did work and when it didn't work. And we're still in research mode. Like, don't this is not a perfect science or whatever you want to call it. But what we do know is we have 500 data points that show us what not to do and what to do so far. And next year we'll have 5,000 this time. But what he was after is he's like, he's trying to figure out a way to make a living. But his heart, if you know Joe, his heart was really to try to figure out a way to make the world a better place. At the end of the day, that's what it is. And whether it was making an engine run off of water, or if it was taking fossil fuel that comes out diesel and mitigates it so it has zero emissions or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, too, he didn't want to be part of corporate America. He's like, he's like, I will partner with your family, but I don't want any other partners. Like, so you help us figure it out and you run with it and you make it work. And we're going to have a pretty cool business together. And that's where we're at today. So he
Yeah.
still lives in Florida. We're in Kentucky. He comes back and forth and he's constantly noodling on like just little tweaks that we can do to the machine. And our newest machines are like crazy. It's like it felt like we went from a 1950s pickup to a 1980s pickup to a 2030 pickup, all in like 6 months. So that's kind of cool stuff. And now we have some other people that are helping us. And I asked him, I'm like, what's your 2035 look like? What's your 2050 look like? And this one guy said, I'm thinking 150 years out. I'm not thinking about that short. And I'm like, I like this guy. Let's figure out, like, looking back at it, like the Haber Bosch system's only been around for 120 years. Like, it's new. Like, and if you look at just in general, like, we're doing some fun stuff, and agriculture is about to get real fun and interesting, especially if you don't have to pay for fertilizer and herbicide and pesticides and chemicals. Like, if you can reduce all those costs and then do it cleaner, that means we're also affecting human health and animal health. So that's kind of where we're headed and what we're doing, and it's a lot of fun. And it's super fun to also be doing it with our family, and doing it with, like, our sales guys are farmers that already got the machines. That's it. Like, we don't have the suited up, fancy schmoozer guys. Like, we're not going to either. We don't need to. We have guys like you and I that are like been in the trenches, like our boots are muddy and we know what we smell like, are the same guys that we sell to. And they're the same guys that they're the fabric of this country. I was talking to somebody yesterday and they said there's 200,000 farmers in this country. I'm like, there's 200,000 farmers, serious farmers in this country, feeding 400 million people plus exports. We got to take care of them. Everybody else is like, so we are farmer focused. Like, everybody's like, you could charge like 5 times more for your machine. I'm like, no, that's not the model. The model is to make farmers more productive and successful. In one summer, they could pay for the machine, and their cost is basically a couple solar panels. They can run the sucker out as much as they want to, unless there's no sun. They plug it in the grid or whatever. But that's kind of where we're at. It's a lot of fun being where we're at, but it's also like, it's human health, it's animal health, it's crop health, and it's also legacy built. Like, we get calls every day, like, what can I do that my kids can keep doing what I'm doing? We had one of the biggest farmers in the world that I was talking to the other day, and he said something like this. He said, 21 years ago, I got married, and on that day before my wedding, I went out and I harvested 45 bushel wheat in Canada. He said, I was in a $90,000 tractor and I was my only employee. Now I've got thousands of employees or something like that. And, and I've got a $1.5 million tractor and I got 45 bushel wheat, and I sold for the same price as I did 21 years ago. He's like, there's something wrong with that. He's like, it's a race to the bottom. He's like, my land is 3 times expensive and I'm not making any more money. and then my money's not worth as much. He's like, that's a problem. So he's like, the only thing I can see of all the things we've done is get rid of my nitrogen cost, reduce my chemical costs, get higher yields somehow. He's like, we are on a quest to figure that out. His goal is to feed 1 billion people. That's what his goal is. And I think that if we kind of think that way, like we've got to reduce our costs and get smarter about it. And we've gotten really good at doing things. Like my grandpa in Perry, Iowa would have been happy to get 50 bushel corn in 1950. Now, if you're in Perry, Iowa, you got 50 bushel corn. It is like it's growing through some weeds from the years before. Like people do not get 50 bushel corn anymore, unless it just got so droughty they planted it like in August or something. But moral story is the average in this country is 180 bushel corn, and and I'm not even sure corn is something that we should be growing as much anyways. But the reality is it's what feeds the majority of the animals that feeds us in this country, and so that's part of our process. Like how can we do smart things for farmers to be successful? And then if it's just this simple technology of electrocuting water with lightning, like let's do it. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, that's so some more, I guess, a question about how it works. Do you understand fully how it works? Is the response that you're seeing in the plants coming from the nitrogen, or is it from some sort of like reducing reaction in the soil?
It's both. So it's by weight, it's not the same nitrogen, although nitrogen, and this can be argued, the typical UAN 28, 38, 32 that people put on is typically about 86% inefficient. Like we put it on, and a lot of it goes back in the atmosphere, it ends up in a dead zone in the sea. Um, Ours is just super efficient. Like when you put it on, it goes right in. But there is a nitrogen component to it, but if you test it, it's not much more than what's in your water. But we're doing something else. We're also we're oxygenating it at some level. These micro bubbles are actually getting oxygenated. And if you take highly oxygenated water and you put it on soil, what happens? Bacteria goes nuts and it starts doing amazing things. If you take highly oxygenated water and you put it on, and I'm kind of getting on a different tangent, but just trying to understand it, that highly oxygenated water is also when you put it on a plant in the middle of summer, when it needs oxygen or the roots do, it's going to absorb it and you're going to get a better yield. So that's why, like, we've had guys that front loaded like 100 gallons on and they saw similar results to 28, maybe a little bit less. But guys that put it on throughout the season, or they even mix it with their pivots, they got awesome results. Like we had 1.9 extra tons of potatoes per acre in Washington State through a pivot. How is it you can put 27,000 gallons of water on an acre with 20 gallons of product and it actually works? I don't know. It's like homeopathy or something. But going back to it, there's harmonics and frequencies and geek stuff. Like it's activated water. Along with how it works is like we're not blowing apart the water and making nitrogen from that. We're taking the air and it just happens to have the nitrogen unlocked and it attaches to the water as it drops down. But when it does that, there's extra oxygen that goes into the product too. So it's really an amazing phenomenon, this whole thing, anyways. And there are people trying it all over the world. Most people are doing it inefficiently, so it's harder for them to see the results that they want, and also the cost of electricity is ridiculous. Ours is 1,100-watt machine that makes 500 acres worth of corn nitrogen a year, and other things. Like let's call it corn, nitrogen, and reduction of every other chemical. Or it does amplify biologicals. That's part of what we think too is this oxygenating of the water mixed with just it's ions, right? Like we have ions in the air, nitrogen and oxygen are ions, and they attach, and then when they go in the plant, they work, and it comes in different formats. You're going to naturally have nitrates and nitrites in that because that's what happens in the natural part of it. But we don't have any ammonia, so it kind of works differently. And there's also different species of oxygen and nitrogen that we've heard about that we're accessing, and we don't really understand that there's no name for them. So it just makes them like there's this extra efficiency in this thing that we call air that we breathe that we have access to that's going to be able to feed a lot more people, reduce overall water and chemicals, and make the soil overall good, make the world a better place.
What percentage of the time are you seeing that the folks who've been using it, does it not produce the expected response that they are looking
So
for?
it's 100%. There's a 100% chance that somebody is not going to do well if their water's funky. Like if they've got
Mm,
really high TDS water, and high pH water. And I'm not saying that their water is funky in general; it just doesn't work in our machine. So a part of our machine apparatus is it pulls out some of the TDS or the solids in that. Yeah, so we have to pull the TDS, and like a lot of water has it might have algae in it in the summertime, might have tannins in it. It has different oils in it. There's a lot of things in water. Being in the drink business, you realize a lot more of the water that you have throughout the country, even in cities. And so now we get that opportunity to look at it on the farm. And man, if you're in Indiana or Illinois, the chances of you having clean water, like that you would actually want to drink, is not good, let alone put through these machines. We know that if you have a certain TDS water, you have like, let's just say you had 500 TDS water, you have 2 weeks before it clogs up the machine. Just going to happen. Like it's just a math equation on timing. If you've got 50 TDS water, nobody does. That's what we need. So when we get it down to 50, now it's like rainwater. So now we've made it rainwater. We take those minerals, put it back in the dirt, and then now we can take that rainwater level of TDS, and we're now making what we need to put on the crop. And so that's why a lot of guys, they use it with their spray water too. And obviously, if it has less TDS and other stuff in it, whatever they're using is going to work better as well. But ours does amplify it. Like it's got a magnetic or a paramagnetic effect as well.
So how do you test for that water? Do you guys send with your machine like
So
water
that's
sample
that's
tests or something?
so here's the thing. We've had guys test it all over the world, and they all have the same response. It's not showing anything, or it's showing so little. It's like my city water has more nitrates in it than this stuff does. Come on. And so we're like, well, it just doesn't work the same. Just think about it differently. Think about it like we just did 25,000 acres of these crops. And when these guys put it on at this rate, they had this success rate. So going back to it, it was about 60 to 70% success rate this year where they had decent water, and they had good, amazing, or just less than good results, but pretty much average. But their costs were like $2 an acre instead of like 60 to 300. We had guys that had not so good water, which we didn't know that till later. Uh, and they would have been like 80% didn't like it. Like it had problems. It might have started out good, so they put it on the crop early. You saw a response, and then later on, like that's part of it. So those are all kind of like the fundamentals. Where we're at now is we're pretty sure that between 40 and 70 gallons an acre throughout the season, a little bit in the ground with a seed because it does make germination better, um, and a little bit in furrow or with the seed, and then throughout the season, whenever you would normally spray, or if you could just hit it 3 or 4 times, you're gonna see response. But the interesting thing is the later you put it on, the more response you get. You're getting like, and we had interesting things like the corn turned orange, and we're like, what is that? Like with the same seed genetics, and on this side it's all orange, and over there it's got gold tassels. And found out that they had carotenoids in it, and so it was producing extra nutrients for later. And we're like, how did that happen? So that's kind of stuff we're like, so that guy had really good water. Hold on just a sec here. So that's kind of stuff we're looking at right now. We're trying in South Africa and New Zealand and Australia as well. So we're getting south of the equator crops, and so we can do more testing. But moral of the story is right now it's a pretty good success rate on most people, but we're still not even close to where we can be. I think we're gonna next year, knowing now that how the water standards need to be and our proper settings, we should have a 95% success rate at least. So that's kind of where we're at. Yep.
One last question. Have you seen certain environments or cropping contexts that performs best in, vice versa, that it doesn't perform as well in?
If it rains really really hard, like 13 inches of rain, doesn't matter how much you put on it, it's not really working. If it's super droughty, like under 12% humidity, you need to wait until it's got some humidity in the air or irrigate to make it work properly. Those are the two like biggest things I've seen.
Got it. And is there certain
Yeah.
crops that work better or worse with it?
No, I mean, we had crazy results in wheat. where it was really high, like a 5 bushel bump on 45 bushel wheat, which is a pretty big jump, up to like 80 bushel bump, like at the end, which is just like those guys don't even want to talk about it because it's like so far out there. And corn, we had people in the 400 bushel range, which I had no idea we'd get that high mixed with manure. And we had guys that had 128 that were like stoked out of their mind because it was a droughty area. So we had like the whole gamut. But I'd say on average, our corn bushels were 230 to 260 compared to everything else. And on soy, we had about about a 10% bump in yield on most of them if they put it on at the beginning and at the end. On pasture, we're seeing it's like hay. If you put it on the hay, it stays greener longer after you cut it, which is pretty interesting. We're trying to understand that. And then on potatoes, like ridiculous responses on potatoes. We don't know why, but they need a little bit of calcium and boron too. Otherwise, the leaves don't look so pretty. So your neighbors make fun of you. So that's kind of like some of the fundamentals. But so far, we're trying it on citrus. We're trying it on sweet potatoes and sugar beets, and anything that needs nitrogen, anything that doesn't, to figure out like. And then also, like, if guys put it on in the fall, does it actually work for nitrogen? It's different. It actually works on the debris and it breaks it down faster, so it turns into more other things. So we're getting more P and K, or more P and calcium or other nutrients, even when we're just putting on this water. So they're basically the plants are mining for things. So going back to it, we're still learning. We're doing a rice study this year too, in Ghana and in Arkansas. So we'll see some really cool stuff. And then the next thing is livestock wise, what we're working on.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn more about that. All right, I know you gotta get going. Are you concerned at all about messing with the nitrogen fertilizer world with something like this?
But, if anything, they need to take a peek at what else that can be done. A lot of people are like, do you think you're a threat to them? Not right now. But it's
Not yet,
but
not
are we?
yet, but
Yeah,
dang, this is something that
but
could be.
I think what it comes back to is we're also potentially a threat to all the chemicals, because it's not just nitrogen that it works against. But at the end of the day, it's like if we grow more food on the planet, we have more people to feed. They're gonna have plenty of stuff to sell. If anything, they need to mix their stuff with ours to make it better, to make theirs better. But I don't know if they realize that. But their farmers sure will.
Yeah. Well, it was great talking to you,
Yep.
Travis. If you want to learn more about Green Lightning, go to greenlightning.ag. Is there any other things that you'd like to mention before we jump off?
No, appreciate you. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks a lot, Travis. Have a good day.
Yep, have a good. Yep, bye.
Thank you for listening to the Acres USA podcast, a podcast production of Acres USA. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres USA is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. And we're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experiences.